Hi, welcome to our project, SleepSync, where essentially we are giving you recommendations on your sleep and your caffeine based on how many hours you sleep and common daily habits like how much time you have on your screen before you sleep, exercise, etc. The inspiration behind this project stems from a very real problem where us college students are overworked, where we have low sleep, and sometimes we just need that caffeine and just a little something to help us understand how much sleep we actually need in the day to function.
Okay, so here we wanted to use data-driven insights for our users, so we used real-world data. So I'll elaborate on that. So here are our tables in SleepSync. So we have caffeine drinks, caffeine recommendations, daily habits, sleep data, sleep recommendations, user, and work schedule. So here's an example of caffeine drinks, and we're just limiting it to 10 entries. And then as you can see, here's a query for work schedule. So we just, that just shows the work schedule for the user, for different user IDs. And then we're also doing it for all of the other entries in the table. So this just shows that everything is stored in our database using all of the data sets.
So finally, here's our product. I'm going to show off the UI a little bit. Here's our home page. You can see this is where we'll display the sleep recommendation and caffeine recommendations. We have a place for users to log their sleep, for them to create accounts and log into their accounts, and finally a place where they can search for different drinks based on their caffeine recommendations, and a place to input their weekly work schedule. Here I'll sample creating an account. So my name is Michael Jackson as an example, and I can put in a job title. For this example, I'm a singer, aged 40 and male. I'm going to make a custom username, MikeJax3, as well as a password for my own security, which was important for our users. So you can see here that account was successfully created, so I should be able to log in now. Let's try it. And once you log in, which you can see we were successfully able to do, you should be able to edit or update your profile. So let's say I had my birthday and now I'm 41 years old, and as well I decided to stop singing and take up dancing instead. I can change that and update my profile, which you can see was done successfully.
Now for our next part, we're going to be inputting our actual sleep logs. So as you can see that we have three different sections for inputting your sleep data. First is the start time of when you're actually starting to fall asleep with the correct date and time, and then the end time of when you just woke up. And then we have our sleep quality also separated into two different options. You either record it as poor or fair, and that taps into our algorithm in determining your sleep recommendation. So as you can see, for example, one person could have fallen asleep at 10 p.m. on the night before and then woken up at 6 or 6:30 a.m. the day after. So here we are just logging that in, and then once we ensure that all our values are correct, then we can be able to successfully submit the sleep log, show it in our database, and be able to accurately display that. And here we are adjusting those values. And then once we complete this and our sleep log is correctly added in, then we log in our daily habits. We log in the hours of how much we exercise, the screen time in hours, and then our current stress level, and then we input that as well, and it should be logged on. Next, we'll show the actual home page.
Okay, so now as you can see in our homepage, you can see the sleep recommendations. So recommended hours is 9, and the reason is elevated stress, prioritize sleep and self-care. And then as you can see, there's caffeine recommendations, a productivity score, and then the recent sleep logs, which we're also able to delete. And then
As you can see, we will be navigating to our SleepSync cafe. This is more of an information center to kind of gauge what kind of caffeinated drinks we have. So now we're searching up the teas with the milligrams of caffeine, calories, volume, etc. And so now going in, we're going to search for coffee and find all the beverages, the caffeinated beverages that involve coffee. And so these are a couple of different examples that we go through. And then finally, we're going to go in and search up McDonald's. So just find branded caffeinated beverages that have McDonald's as their logo.
So now you might be wondering that, okay, like we're adding all this information in our front end, in our UI, but is it actually being properly updated in our back end in the GCP database? And here we are showing that it actually is. So once we select all the users, we can see that the most recent user logged in created is Michael Jackson. And once we update his profile and we update his profession, you can see that his occupation changed from a singer to a dancer once we input his correct user ID. So if you look over here, and once we input it, you can see that, okay, his job title is now changed as a dancer. So it is being accurately updated and reflected across. And now we're going to be testing, based on this was like going on real time while we are looking at the exact UI of the user base. So now if we're inputting a correct sleep log, we should be able to reflect that and actually show a singly inputted sleep log in the sleep data database, in the sleep data table for this specific user. So it's easy since the user ID is a foreign key and reflected across all specific tables. If you look at all the rows for sleep data for this user, we should be able to see that one new log entry that we have over here. And as you can see, it is going, right now it is empty because we haven't inputted anything, and then once we do, we should be able to soon see that change reflected shortly in real time. And as you can see, finally, we have a new sleep log ID for this specific instance. So you can see that for each user, it is different, and then all these tables we can show up for every single specific drink. So caffeine drinks doesn't have anything right now because we haven't inputted any data for the daily habits and then the sleep recommendations, etc. So those have not been shown up. So once we do input that data, we should be able to see something for the recommended caffeine and the recommended sleep.
So that was a little bit about how we store what the user inputs, but a big part of the web application is generating insights and recommendations for the user. So here you can see that when the user inputted their sleep data, we inserted into caffeine recommendations a new recommendation for how much caffeine they should drink with their user ID as a foreign key. We do the same for sleep recommendations, and each time a user creates a new sleep log, the old sleep recommendation and caffeine recommendation are deleted, and a new one is put in based on the most recent sleep cycle, which is also important to the functionality of our web application. What we're about to demo next is that if a user deletes a sleep log, this is also reflected in our recommendations as well as the user data itself. So not only will the sleep data be deleted, but also their most recent recommendation will be reset to the sleep log that was present most recently before the one that was deleted, as well as the same thing happening for caffeine recommendation. Finally, another big thing that was factored into sleep recommendation and caffeine recommendation was daily habits. So again, user exercise and user screen time, as well as their current stress level. So you can see that functionality here, that we are in fact saving the user's daily logs.
So here we are going to showcase our constraints. So I'm logging my sleep right now, and I'm starting on the 4th and going to the 3rd. However, that doesn't work because the start date is after the end date. And then here, it's going from the 4th to the 6th, so that's way over a day long, which is also reflected in our constraints. Okay, so after this, we are going to move on to our triggers. So as you can see here, the recommended hours of sleep is 9, and the reason is elevated stress. And then here, I'm going to input a day's worth of good sleep. So I'm going to go from 12 a.m. all the way up till 10:30. Okay, so now here's me just logging in again. Okay, so now you can see that change reflected in our sleep recommendations, and the recommended hours is only 7 since we got a good night of sleep.
A transaction that's in a stored procedure. So essentially, if you have more than a specific amount of nights of poor sleep, we're going to be having a specific banner that shows that you have had, for example, X amounts of poor sleep, and we want you to be able to be aware of that so you can fix that in the user. So as you can see, once we reload, and here's us logging back in again after we recorded another night of, for example, 3 hours of sleep. And then once we go back, we can see that, oh no, we've had 3 nights of poor sleep, and then we have a recommendation to consider improving our sleep habits based upon the sleep recommendations shown.
Next, we'd like to showcase our stored procedure. So you can see here, I'm originally being recommended 80 milligrams of caffeine, probably because I had a fairly good night of sleep. But let's say I input a really poor night of sleep. So I only slept 2 hours from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., and I log it to be a poor night of sleep, and I submit that, and I also had, let's say, an insane amount of screen time. I used my phone for 7 hours, and I only exercised for 30 minutes, and I'm incredibly stressed out. These changes go to the back end, and a new caffeine recommendation is generated for me. So when I reload this page and I sign in again, we should see my caffeine recommendation change. So here I am signing in again. And when we land on the home page, you can see that my caffeine recommendation has increased to 300 milligrams because I had such a poor night of sleep.
Looking into the future for our project, we would have liked to incorporate more of an ML aspect to our project to just be able to hone in on the accuracy of the feedback that our app is giving to our user. And in addition to that, going into kind of more functionalities we could have implemented. One thing we wanted to, and we started working on, would be entering in a user's weekly work schedule. This would allow us to build out more of an accurate visual of start and end times for our sleep data and our recommendations for our users. And so as you can see, a user is currently inputting into the update your weekly work schedule, their work schedule for the week. And so ideally we'd be able to save this work schedule and use it in providing recommendations for our users.
Thank you for watching. Choose SleepSync.